In this chapter, how to apply tempo estimation to sync a project to a pre-recorded piece of music quickly. How to apply audio warping when changing tempo. The use of MIDI effects to supplement your compositions. How to use the arranger track to simplify song construction. How to use sidechaining to create a variety of effects. How to use VariAudio to convert audio to MIDI data. And how to use the score function to create printed music. Historically, MIDI and other electronic tools could only be used with music that was created on a computer. It was impossible to synchronize a live performance without timecode or click track. Cubase 6 offers a solution. The new tempo estimation function allows Cubase to synchronize itself by making subtle adjustments in the tempo track. Let's start with a few bars of material recorded with no tempo reference at all. You'll notice the audio and the metronome do not line up. We have to turn on the tempo track so that Cubase can adjust its metronome throughout the song. Select the audio track and then open the Tempo Detection panel. Now click Analyze. Then click Done. Cubase will generate a rough tempo track to match the freeform audio. Let's listen to our audio and our click track and see if they line up now. Much better. You can see there are a lot of tools here to smooth and refine your tempo track, as well as making adjustments for syncopations, time signature changes, and other rhythmic devices. You can also tune your tempo track a little at a time using the iterative tuning command. You can also use tempo detection to warp a freeform performance to a fixed tempo project. To do this, complete the steps for tempo estimation, then open the audio menu and select Advanced. Now, click on the Set Definition from Tempo option. Here you can choose to apply changes to just this project or to this audio clip globally. You also have the option to place all tracks into musical mode. And click OK. Now we can set our project back to a fixed tempo and the audio will be warped to match it. Let's take just a moment to review some vocabulary. There are three similar terms that can be confusing to a new user. They include quantizing, audio warping, and time warping. All three are ways to adjust the relationship between musical events and the song's rhythm. Let's think of the song's rhythm as a ruler, and the markings on it represent bars and beats. In other words, you would tap your foot in time with these markings. To get a good rhythmic feel, the notes in the music also have to line up with the markings. We can make that happen in three different ways. Quantizing, which started with MIDI, means moving the notes so they align to the grid. Quantizing can now be done with audio as well as MIDI. Audio warping means stretching the performance so it aligns to the grid. Time warping means stretching the grid so it aligns to the performance. Sometimes a combination of all three is required to achieve the desired result. But not only does Cubase allow you to process audio as if it were MIDI, Cubase also lets you process MIDI much like it were audio. We typically think of effects as being limited to audio processing, but Cubase has a large collection of MIDI effects as well. You access MIDI effects from the MIDI Inserts tab in the Inspector of MIDI tracks and instrument tracks. Here you can see a comprehensive list. Some of these features work more as tools to help transpose or convert MIDI from one key to another. Still others, like Arpège 5, are terrific in generating creative new alternatives. Simply activate them on your instrument track and then begin to explore. One of the most widely used MIDI inserts is Beat Designer. We looked at Beat Designer briefly in Chapter 4, but let's dig a little deeper. Beat Designer is a straightforward, pattern-based sequencer that works well when composing drum parts. It requires a sound generator like Groove Agent 1. Let's open up Groove Agent 1 and Beat Designer and get the two going together like in Chapter 4. Beat Designer gives you the ability to designate a time for each lane, designate its MIDI note assignment, adjust its swing, or even delete the lane entirely. You can adjust the volume and flam by where you click on the square or with the global flam controls in the lower left corner. You can access a large library of presets by using the preset browser. You can establish how many steps you want to work with and at what resolution. You have a jump control setting, which determines how Beat Designer switches from one pattern to the next. You may want to jump immediately, or you may want it to finish the pattern before changing to the next pattern. At the bottom are banks and subbanks. They're laid out in a keyboard pattern, so you can use Beat Designer as a live part of a performance and trigger pattern changes from a keyboard. Use the Edit menu to move your patterns from Beat Designer to your MIDI track or instrument track if you'd rather work in a linear fashion. One note: after you've pasted your patterns into a track, you should turn off Beat Designer so it doesn't run along with your MIDI part when you play back your project. Beat Designer can do more than drums. If you insert it on a synth track, Beat Designer can be used as a sequencer for bass or synth parts, like this. Another powerful creative tool is the Arranger track. The Arranger track lets you work with sections of your project in a nonlinear fashion. This way, you don't have to copy and paste events in the project window. Let's create an Arranger track from the Project Add Track menu. Now we'll designate portions of our drums, bass, and synth lines as Arranger events. To do this, activate the snap and use the pencil tool to draw out an appropriate section on the Arranger track. Now, let's give this section an appropriate name. Repeat this process for several other portions of our project. Now we need to construct an Arranger chain to build up our song. Open the editor on the Arranger track. You can add Arranger events to the Arranger chain in several ways. You can double-click an event on the left side of the editor. Right-click and select an action. Drag and drop events from the editor list. And drag and drop events directly from the project window. There's an option to designate how many times a specific section should repeat. This avoids having to chain together multiple instances of shorter material. The last step is to click on the Activate icon to make the Arranger track work. Depending on what style of music you're making, this may be just what you need. It's also a handy way to try out different sequences of verse and chorus during the initial songwriting phase. And of course, it works the same with MIDI tracks and audio tracks. Another production trick is known as sidechaining. A sidechain is a type of connection between two audio devices, typically an audio source and compressor. Sidechaining was born out of necessity in the early days of broadcasting, but has become a popular element in modern dance music. The original purpose of sidechaining a compressor was to automatically turn down the music when the announcer was speaking. That particular trick is still used and is called ducking. But we can use the same concept to generate a pumping dance bass. To make this work, we'll need two things. First, we need a strong bass tone with a compressor across it. Second, we need a rhythmic source to trigger the compressor. Let's create a bass part. Now we'll insert a compressor and activate sidechain mode. Activating sidechain will automatically create another routing option in our VST connections, which we'll see in a moment. We want to trigger the compressor with the kick drum so that our bass sound will pump in time with the kick. To do this, we'll use duplicate track on the drums, and then delete everything but the kick. We don't want to route this kick drum to the mix. We want to route it to the compressor, like this. Now, when we start playback, the compressor will only activate when the kick drum is playing. Let's start playback to create a simple bass tone. Nothing too dramatic so far. Now let's adjust the compressor to a much more radical setting so we can really hear it closing down. That's more like it. Remember that most compressors are designed so that you don't hear them. To get this effect, we have to undo all of that programming. So a few things to keep in mind. You'll probably want to turn off the automatic mode and avoid using the soft knee, analysis, and hold settings. You'll want to use a high ratio with a very low attack and release times. The lower you set these values, the crisper the effect will become. The threshold control will affect syncopation, and the makeup gain will work like a master volume control for the effect. This effect isn't to everyone's liking, of course, but it's popular in some genres, and Cubase can certainly deliver. Let's move back to our original project and explore one of the more conservative features of Cubase, scoring. Cubase is so well known as a DAW and sequencer that many owners don't realize it's also one of the most powerful music scoring packages on the market. Let's look at one area where the functions of recording and scoring come together. Let's create a lead sheet for our first project, Gonna Getcha. Instead of starting with a blank slate and drawing notes by hand, we'll take a shortcut by converting Janelle's vocals to MIDI notes, which will create the score. To keep things clean, we'll use duplicate track to copy the lead vocal line. This way we can make edits required for the score without disturbing our original part. Now, we'll activate Very Audio and let Cubase analyze Janelle's vocals. From here, we'll select Convert to MIDI and place those MIDI notes in a new track. Now, we open the Score menu and open the part. The new Note Expression system means that Score will capture Janelle's articulation and modulation as well as her notes. With a little bit of editing and a little bit of typing, you can generate a professional lead sheet in no time. Let's move on to Chapter 10, where we'll look at live drums and how to prepare a final mix for maximizing and dither.